Craig from Eastleigh Borough Council, Councillor Karen Lucioni of the Isle of Wight, Councillor Margot Power from Winchester City, Councillor Sarah Vaughan from Southampton City Council, Shirley Young, one of the independent co-opted members, Councillor Minahan from Hampshire County Council, and we suspect Councillor Pepper may not turn up from Gosport. There's been some sort of issue with the train being returned back to Gosport. Do we have any other apologies? No? Thank you very much. Then we move to declarations of interest. On this item, I believe Peter wishes to make a comment to us.
Good afternoon, members and panel. On the issue of the fact that the current Chief Constable may or may not be known to some of you members in a professional capacity, I was asked to give some written advice to the Police and Crime Panel, and I've done that, relevant to the Localism Act 2011. I'm going to read you the last part of that advice for the purposes of today and purposes of the record. I say as follows. For the avoidance of doubt, given that the candidate is an ex-Hampshire Constabulary officer, he would likely be known to you or some of you. That fact does not give rise to any disclosable pecuniary interest or personal interest that has any bearing upon the process or the matters before the Police and Crime Panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. With that in mind, do members have any declarations to make? No? None? Thank you very much. Then moving on to item 3, minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 21st of October 2022, which is on pages 5 to 16 of our pack. I wonder if I could ask the panel whether they consider the minutes to be confirmed as a correct record. Yeah. Yes, we're happy. Thank you very much. Then we go on to item 4, which is questions and deputations. There were no requests received for this meeting, so we don't have any. Then moving on to item 5, Police and Crime Panel Governance Update, which is on pages 17 to 20. The report from the Democratic Services Officer proposes the name of the panel be changed to the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Police and Crime Panel to align with the recent renaming of the police force area. Do members have any questions on the report? If so, I'll ask Caroline to answer them. Any questions? No, none. Caroline, you don't need to answer any. Brilliant. I believe, Dave, you wish to make a comment.
Chair, yes, just to briefly touch on the history of this. When the Police and Crime Commissioner came into post, she said that she would look at this and do what she could to take it forward. She was very much minded by the costs involved, and therefore the approach to it has been managed as a transition. The Police and Crime Commissioner recently came to the Isle of Wight, and I declare I live on the Isle of Wight, and I'm very pleased about this, and did a formal opening in terms of the name, which I think was very good. And I think this is, for me anyway, the Commissioner delivering on what she would. And also, for the community of the Isle of Wight, it gives them a bit of recognition that they form part of the overall Hampshire and Isle of Wight Constabulary. And so I'm very pleased, and I thank the Commissioner for doing that.
Thank you very much, Dave. So the recommendations that we have in front of us are on page 17, and they are that recognising the updated name of the constabulary and the title of the Commissioner, the panel agrees to be known henceforth as the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Police and Crime Panel, and that delegated authority be given to the Democratic Services Officer in consultation with the Chairman of the panel to implement this change, including making updates to the panel's logo and branding. Are we agreed? Thank you very much. Then we move on to item 6A, which is the confirmation hearing for the appointment to the role of Chief Constable of Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Constabulary. The report from the Democratic Services Officer sets out the process to be followed today. I would like to thank the Commissioner and her team for their engagement and communication with the panel and its officers during the recruitment process to support the planning and preparation for the confirmation hearing today. It's much appreciated. The following information has been provided to the panel from the Commissioner's office, which is the name of the preferred candidate. We have a report from the PCC stating why the preferred candidate meets the requirements of the role, terms and conditions of appointment, and an independent member's report. The report from the Commissioner, supported by that of the independent person, has assured the panel that the recruitment process has been properly conducted in adherence with the principles of merit, fairness and openness. I will now invite the Commissioner to share any comments on the process undertaken to select her preferred candidate and her reasons for recommending his appointment. Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'd like to start by saying a big thank you to yourself, to the Democratic Services Officer, Caroline, and to all panel members for meeting today. I feel like I'm being quite a burdensome commissioner at times, where I keep asking you to come together. For me, as a Police and Crime Commissioner, coming into this role 18 months in to be selecting, it's an enormous task selecting a Chief Constable, because, of course, it really does change and shape the way the force operates. And so I feel very privileged to have been able to do that 18 months into my time as a commissioner. I think having to make that decision any earlier than 18 months would have been perhaps a very big hill to climb, but I feel very lucky that I've been able to do that in my first term, and I'm very much looking forward to working with the new Chief Constable if you give your support today on improving policing services across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. I'd also like to place on record, if you don't mind, my thanks to partners across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, particularly Chief Fire Officer, Chief Executive, for example, of Hampshire County Council, and some other very key people who took part in an external panel, so met with the candidates and gave their very considered feedback as part of this process as well. We did also have an internal people panel. I'm happy to answer questions if you want to know anything more about that. It really is an opportunity for me as Police and Crime Commissioner, with the appointment of a new Chief Constable, to stop, pause, think about where British policing is in 2022, where Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Constabulary is in 2022, what's going on financially, recession, inflation and policing budgets, precept and a whole number of things, and how I can help to improve the police service that's delivered across our two beautiful counties of Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, serving over 2 million people. So I have given an enormous amount of thought before I went into the process. One of the key things for me was around making sure that I had a monitoring officer. And Jace Kenny, my chief executive, was not on the interview panel. He instead sat aside as the legal monitoring officer for the process. It's actually, as you probably know from having read the report, quite a prescribed process of recruiting a chief constable, and there are a number of requirements set down by the College of Policing that must be followed. And I want to place on record my thanks to Jace for his incredible support in making sure that I did everything by the book, following the letter of the law there, and making sure that we ran a fair and proper process, as you highlighted in your introduction. I also met with Andy Marsh, the Chief Executive and, in fact, previous Chief Constable of Hampshire Constabulary, on a couple of occasions to talk him through our process and make sure that he had the opportunity to be fully briefed on what I was doing, so the college were happy to lend their support to my process, which I'm very grateful to the college for as well. I did select an independent person who was very pleased to tell me that he did not know a single police officer serving in Hampshire or the Isle of Wight Constabulary, and that was Mr. Brian Johnson. You've obviously got his report contained, UK Development Director for BAE Systems, but most importantly has served on the Solent LEP for several years, was chair and has recently become chair of the Solent Freeport. So works with key partners across Hampshire in the public sector, but is not public sector, and importantly has had no workings with the constabulary before this appointment I asked him to take on. You obviously do have his report before you as well, which gives validity to the process. A couple of other things, I think, from me, Chair, another couple of minutes, then I'll hand over to you for the main part of what I'm sure you want to get into. But there were a number of considerations when appointing a Chief Constable, and I think the first thing for me was to work through, as I made reference to a few moments ago, the need. I'm very focused on ensuring that we have a police service across the two counties that is going to make our local policing the strongest it can possibly be. I want to boost local policing. I want to make sure our uplift numbers and any additional police officers that come forward are boosting local policing. I think there are very few crimes in society that cannot be significantly improved by a really substantial and effective local policing offer. And that's something that the Chief Constable Scott Chilton and I have discussed during the process of the interview and since. And I feel very passionately about that, and I know he does too. We then, looking at the individual, of course, one of the key things for me going into this was the chemistry between the Chief Constable and the Police and Crime Commissioner. It's an incredibly important relationship, making sure that we can work together, that there is trust there. Scott and I have had a small amount of working together previously when he was the Assistant Chief Constable, Head of Local Policing here in Hampshire, and I was the leader of one of the city councils in Hampshire. So we did have some touch points, maybe half a dozen or so, over a couple of year period, and they were, very enjoyable working relationship that we had there. I then had no contact with Scott after that, up until very recently when I became a Police and Crime Commissioner. But for me, it's a bit like a politician representing your local area. You know, Scott not only started his policing career here 30 years ago, but spent 28 years of his 30 years in policing serving here in Hampshire. He lives in Hampshire. That for me was also, somebody that would relocate here or live here is key. Understanding our local communities as he does, having lived here for 30 years. And the fact that I was so lucky to have the choice of an experienced Chief Constable, someone who was already a chief in a neighbouring force, was probably more than I could have hoped for at the start of the process. I did run a robust process. I had chemistry conversations with 8 individuals. My national policing advisor approached 22 individuals across the country that were looking or were at the point of promotion and looking for that chief's role. And Scott, in my opinion, is the very best fit that we can get here because of his background, his knowledge of the force, and because of his experience as an existing chief. Finally, Chair, it would mean the world to me today to have the panel support for the individual that I think is the very best person to work with me in ensuring that I am delivering on my #1 legal responsibility, which is to ensure that there is an effective police service across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. So thank you so much for your consideration today, and I'm happy to take any questions if you have them.
Thank you, Commissioner. I don't see anybody wanting to or needing to ask any questions. So if I may, as a panel, we now have the opportunity to ask questions of the candidate which relate to his professional competence and personal independence, the answers to which will enable members to evaluate his suitability for the role. On the closing of questions, the candidate will be given the opportunity to clarify any answers given during the hearing and ask questions of the panel regarding the next stage of the process. The lines of inquiry that we will follow today have been agreed by the panel and have not been provided to the candidate. Supplementary questions may be used to clarify an answer. Please indicate those clearly so that I don't miss them. So if I may, I would like to welcome and invite Scott to introduce himself and explain what makes him the best candidate to lead Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Constabulary. Scott.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to the panel for convening for this, obviously for all of us, but particularly myself and the Commissioner, a really important occasion, so I am grateful, thank you. The Commissioner outlined, gave a taste there really, I suppose perhaps some of my motives as well as perhaps some of my credentials to be successful in this appointment. I came to Hampshire in 1992 as a 18-year-old new recruit and was posted to Cosham in Portsmouth, having not known the area. However, I have very strong family connections with the county, and that is on the Isle of Wight, and I've considerable on my mother's side of the family are on the Isle of Wight. So there was gravity in terms of being pulled towards Hampshire at such a young age. And then I've spent many years in the county, working predominantly in detective roles in the early part of my career, and operated at various ranks across the whole county, and then spent a short period of time seconded out working abroad in Afghanistan in my mid-service in 2008, 2009, and then came back to the force. I was fortunate enough to be successful to become a chief officer in Hampshire, and over recent years I've performed each of the 3 portfolio roles, so that's local policing, crime, criminal justice, and also as Assistant Chief Constable for joint operations across Hampshire and Thames Valley. And then it came to a point in my career that I felt it was in my professional interests and the right challenge for me to move west and go to Dorset as the Deputy Chief Constable. which I did, and then was again successful being appointed as Chief Constable in Dorset. And that was, and still, you know, and still is an incredible honour and an experience. But to take time out of Hampshire and spend some time working in a neighbouring force and a neighbouring policing region as well, because that's the southwest as the southeast, that, you know, certainly for me was professionally was the level of exposure to take a step back from Hampshire and gain some experience elsewhere. And during that period as well, I've adopted some national roles because as a Chief Constable, as you would expect, to have a role in national policing. And I'm also the national policing lead for investigations and an element of public order in terms of some of the recent issues that you've seen. So 30 years in policing, started off as an 18-year-old, performed many roles as a detective, as an area commander, worked in intelligence, within operations, within firearms, with planning. I've enjoyed the benefit of working with some fantastic people in fantastic communities. This county, or counties, this is where all my adult life has been, and I passionately believe in the fact that this should have the best possible police service. And I want to contribute to that, and I want to contribute even further than what I have done during that period. I do have an approach that I think is a shared ambition with the Commissioner, and one of the decisions I made, I had to make when I was applying for the role is, does my brand of policing, does my ambition accord with that of the Commissioner's ambition? And of course there is some room in the middle of that for negotiations and difference of opinions and different approaches. But did I feel that in addition to my experience and living in the county and feeling passionate about it and raising my family in the county was the right fit, and the right fit now? I'm 49 years of age. I have a huge amount to give back to Hampshire, and I believe the breadth of experience that I've got, the passion that I've got, the approach that the Commissioner is seeking on behalf of the communities, and my connection to the county, it feels absolutely the right fit to do so. So I was incredibly honoured to be selected as the Commissioner's preferred candidate, and hopefully today I can convince you that that is the right appointment for the county as well, counties as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott. I'm now going to invite questions from members. And to start us off, I think I've got a question from Stuart.
Thank you, Chairman. Chief Constable, you may have partly answered the first question already, but the panel have noted that you've only been Chief Constable at Dorset for a little over a year. Could you explain why you've chosen to apply for this role so soon after being appointed in Dorset?
Yeah, I was appointed in July of last year, and during that period at that time, it had been an incredibly busy period for Dorset. We've, as an executive team, as a force, had a really constructive relationship with the Commissioner. We've achieved some really great successes. I cannot put the timing of this opportunity. You know, I can't control the timing of this opportunity. It was never within a plan to do so. But the experience that I've gained, the work that I did in Dorset, and the opportunity to come to Hampshire and lead this wonderful force was too good an opportunity not to consider and apply for. So, you know, as a Chief Constable, for me this is a lateral move, but it's to a bigger force. It's my home force. It's where I live. The pull and the draw is there, and the connections I have to the county mean that for me, having considered all of the pros and cons, it was an overwhelming yes, I must follow up what I feel is the right thing to do.
Chairman, may I ask a supplementary? I just thank you for the answer. That's really helpful. Just wondering, what risk do we have of you finding in an 18 months' time another even more exciting role, and that we would lose you?
You have no risk, and I say that in terms of I gave 28 years of my adult life serving Hampshire, So it's quite clear that this is my home. I've was cross-examined, so to speak, by the Commissioner on this particular point during the interview process and prior to the interview process. Subject to confirmation, there's a contract period, I believe, of 4 years, and I'm wholeheartedly committing to it. Having been through the process I've been to be sat in this room today, I wouldn't take lightly going through another process, even if I was minded to do it, and I'm absolutely not.
Thank you very much. Now, Narinda.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, Scott. Welcome. This is a really personal question from my perspective. How would you engage with hard-to-reach, diverse communities within both Hampshire and the Isle of Wight? And as supplementary to that is increasing public confidence. How would you do that with some high-profile investigations that have come into the public domain?
You know, over the last 30 years, I've seen our communities change within Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. They're far more diverse, they're far more richer, and society in terms of, you know, many of the attitudes that currently exist. But I do not underestimate the importance about being proactive as a Chief Constable. There's something absolutely central to my thinking, which is about demonstrating leadership and setting the tone within the organisation, and that's both through the sort of visible, proactive presence in communities, engaging with that network of people that are out there that make us far more cohesive as a community. I've worked really hard on this in the current role that I'm in, and when we talk about inclusion, I extend that to the breadth of challenges we face of those people, either whether it be, you know, underrepresented groups of people in terms of physical characteristics, protected characteristics, cultural characteristics, but also in relation to LGBTQ, in relation to disability. The force has made really good progress. In my, examining this, the force has made really good progress, but there's a significant way to go. One of the first things that I would do upon appointment, in fact prior to appointment, would be really reviewing that and seeing whether we've got the right level of investment, whether it's embedded in the DNA for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Constabulary to build those sustainable relationships, both from the more senior parts of the organisations, but particularly at a local level through neighbourhood policing, through local command. I think this is a fantastic county. I think it offers everything in terms of opportunity to do so. I think we could work even harder than what we have done. There's obviously a lot of national commentary around this, and some of the cases that we will all have read in the social media really concern me. Absolutely, I would do everything within my power to make sure that that's not on our watch in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. And, in terms of a priority, of course, cutting crime, of course, making sure we get the right outcomes for victims, making sure that we really, we show care and compassion, but we're a really good investigative outfit. We're part of that in partnership. We're making sure that our communities feel safe, they feel connected, they feel engaged, they feel they can reach out. So absolutely central to my plans.
Thank you very much. But just before I take the next question, just a top tip with the microphones. They're very directional. So if you have it pointing away from you, you won't hear it and it won't come through on the camera. But if you have it pointing at you, in rather aggressive fashion, it will. Matthew.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thanks for the advice on the microphones as well whilst we're here. So I think you've kind of covered some of my question around equality and diversity and how important that is for us as a force to engage in. I'd like to know how you feel we can better recruit in that area and how we need a force to mirror that of the society in which we hope to serve. And to what extent you feel that is a priority and what your plans will be to achieve that for the Constabulary in Hampshire and Isle of Wight.
Thank you very much for the question. As you know, policing nationally in the UK has had a programme of uplift. We're now in the third year of 20,000, and the number in endorse it on additional numbers is about 650, but of course recruitment extends beyond that because of people that leave and retire and such like. So there has been a significant period in terms of forces focusing around how they can recruit a more diverse workforce. Absolutely, the force has made incremental improvements around that, but it is nowhere near it needs to be. There are some system and process issues in terms of opportunity and fairness and understanding the process that we need to work harder on. I would welcome an examination on some of the law and the legislation that means that we can actually reach out in terms of recruiting people from a broader range of skills, particularly around first and second language. I think there's some national issues there. Only recently I had a conversation as part of a review process with the College of Policing about exactly how can we achieve your point there, because what we can't do is be satisfied with where we're at. In terms of leadership, it's absolutely a responsibility of mine to, and again, thank you for making the point. I touched upon it earlier, but to set the tone right from the very off, and that includes the development of leadership opportunities, but also opportunities for people to diversify across the organisation, to make policing more attractive. For me, this is, in my professional career, certainly in a leadership role, this is a watershed moment, and it's a once-in-the-lifetime opportunity to go out there and reach out to communities. The investment in a positive action team is highly welcomed, but we can't rely upon a group of professional, knowledgeable individuals just to do that for us. Everybody that works for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Constabulary is an ambassador for what we do, and therefore should actually be engaging people in conversations about, have you considered a career in policing? So your final point about, is it a priority for you? Yes. Yes, it is. Thank you.
And just to follow up on that, do you believe that the current recruitment process is enabling people from diverse communities, both in terms of ethnicity, but also in terms of education level and class? Is that a barrier currently to the recruitment process, and how might that be improved?
I do think it's a barrier. My experience of policing is that it's very best and it's very finest when you've got a broad range of individuals, some younger people, some people that may be underrepresented, some people with life experience. The current recruitment process, particularly around the PQF entry route, i.e. a degree on the end of it, I welcome in terms of professionalising policing. I don't support in terms of it being the only way to recruit people into the organisation. I am very active and strong-willed in wanting to work at a national level to make sure whatever the future recruitment processes into policing, that absolutely give an opportunity from anybody from any walk of life to come into policing. And for example, you know, and there are many examples, in the same way that policing has put a significant amount of effort and has yet failed to achieve where it needs to be in terms of groups, people that are hard to reach, people with different cultural experiences or backgrounds. Similarly, we need to look at people that are in the military that might want to come in policing. How do we actually get those, you know, through the front door, supported and connected to policing? So there's a whole raft of thoughts and processes we're working with nationally now that I would, and I am endorsing, that I would bring into Hampshire to try and make us more accessible.
Thank you very much. Dave.
Thank you, Chair. With a long-standing, long-past history in finance, but not great, I was interested at a recent conference I attended on behalf of the panel, where we discussed both the Commissioner's priorities in terms of the budget and the Chief Constable's priorities in terms of the budget. So my question focuses around that. The panel will shortly consider the policing budget and preset for 2023-24. What would be your spending priorities, and how will you be involved in planning the budget for the forthcoming year?
I think that's probably one of the things that I, you know, as a serving Chief Constable, Chief Officer for a number of years, this is central to operational delivery. I might not have been very impressive at maths at school, but certainly as a Chief Constable, doing the detail around the budget is really, really important. And it's incredibly important that it's a through-the-year process. It's not an October to January process when the settlement comes in from the Home Office. And it's not a year-upon-year process. If we're going to be progressive and deliver against both the Police and Crime Commissioner's key priorities, but also priorities that I feel support those and are really important to our communities, we need to strategically and effectively plan, and we need to be efficient, and we need to be effective. And therefore, we need to ensure ourselves, or I need to reassure myself, that the current spending programme, the current levels of investment, the current change and transformation programmes are actually value for money. And when you talk about things like IT programmes and other technological solutions, as well as the delivery of frontline staff, they have big numbers on them. There's not one person in this room that will not be concerned about the current global financial situation. And that situation doesn't look like it's going to improve, certainly not in the short term, we can all hope. So actually, coming into the force, if appointed, coming into the force, I'd adopt the same methodology that I've adopted in my current force as Chief. I develop a process with making sure there's an effective cost challenge to drive out inefficiency before I go asking the Commissioner to set a budget, so I can reassure her, and then she can obviously present to the panel whatever those recommendations are. And I also develop a number of scenarios, what it would look like. This is what you will get for every pound that is spent, but with confidence that the money that is being spent has been effectively thought through. So in terms of the public, the taxpayer, the council tax, the precept, they actually know what they're getting for their money. And of course, there are fluctuations in terms of that financial position. We've seen over recent years, and I've worked with 5 commissioners now, so this would be my 6th. There are different approaches required. What is really evident here with the financial scrutiny that I've seen adopted in Hampshire, that my approach would fit well, deliver the options, explain what the operational benefit is, and where there are pressure points, explain what the impact would be on frontline policing services should there be that squeeze. So I always enforce the Resource Control Board, which is the finance board. I have regular briefings. I am by no means an expert, but I do have lots of discussions around borrowing, around moving capital across, around looking at where our transformation programs are going to get the biggest bang for the buck. So, yeah, I play a huge amount of value of doing that in every working week, not just in the budget season at the end of the year.
Thank you very much. If I go to Tony now.
Hi, Scott. I've got a small question, but I think it's quite important. It's how will you demonstrate the value of for money to the residents? And I'll just broaden it a little bit, because Hampshire, the way Hampshire's made up, in the south we've got 2 big cities, north we've got small, as we go up through Hampshire, smaller towns, and I shouldn't say this, but I will. Sometimes it looks as it's being spent elsewhere, and my residents, and I expect a lot of people are saying, well, what's happening in my area? Because the big problems do happen in the cities. There's no good saying it doesn't, but the residents want to know what's happening in their area with the police stations, things like that. I wonder if you can broaden it out a bit for me, please.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, this is one of the central issues that I was discussing with the staff and with the Commissioner about exactly this point. I mean, you know, Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, we've got urban, we've got city, we've got rural communities. We've got a bit of water between 2 of them. We have you know, we've got unitary authorities as well as district councils, and we've built the model quite sensibly, in my opinion, around large estate, around custody. But the consequence of that, over the years, there's been a feeling or a perception around police withdrawal, particularly in some of those non-city areas, non-urban areas. I come from a very passionate position around neighbourhood policing is the centre of what we do. It's the bedrock of what we do. And communities not only need to be safe, they need to feel safe. My track record is investing in rural communities, rural policing, as well as making sure that we manage the high harm, threat and demand. And it's a phrase that's thrown about a little bit too literally, but a sort of back to basics, a neighbourhood model where people understand who their neighbourhood teams are, they can connect to them, they can ask them questions, they know when they can engage with them, they know where to go to meet them. And of course, you know, some difficult financial decisions need to be made about keeping police stations open and whether it's the right thing to do. So one of the things that I'm very keen to look at, and I will be out the blocks, is to working with the team to understand whether the current policing model actually delivers exactly what you've described. Do you see your officer? Do you know how to contact them? When you call for them, actually are they deployed to investigate the right type of crimes? We cannot operate a police service where there's a, there's a pull to the cities because that's where all the demand is. We need to think differently around how we effectively deploy it and make sure that we're taking an intelligence-based approach. We understand the demands, but actually we're here to police the whole of the 2 counties, not just where the high harm and threat demand is. And it can be achieved, you know, when you look at the size of the force, you look at the size of the budget, there are options around the model, there are options around delivering policing. I won't go into it now because it's not appropriate. I made some of those changes where I am now, and the results have been really impressive because there's been a really positive response from the public. We're really starting to make a difference in terms of, you know, not just in terms of outcomes of crime for data, but really important, people feeling safe because they know who their neighbourhood officer and they know how to speak to them. So I'm actually really quite excited about influencing and impacting on some of those changes, but I absolutely recognise your point as being, you know, central to my thinking. Thank you.
Thank you for that. If we can go to... Oh, I've got a supplementary from Matthew, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If I can just come in there very quickly. You've mentioned the importance of rural policing. I represent a city, Southampton City. We're also experiencing low levels of officers on our neighbourhood policing team. I wonder how, you mentioned the value that you place on neighbourhood policing. Could you maybe give us some more indication on how you would sort of tackle that moving forward and why you think that neighbourhood policing is so important and vital to all of our communities?
And I do recognise that neighbourhood policing isn't just a unique feature. It's within cities. It's really important, particularly, you know, business communities, particularly local with young people. Is incredibly important that we continue to reinvest in that stable neighbourhood policing team where people aren't being pulled away. I mean, the first point is to effectively manage your demand in the first place, and there is some work to be done around that. The volume of calls and contact that the police have in various forms, that is quite flabbergasting. But what we need to do is make sure the public are really clear about actually where the police can add value and where perhaps we can work more effectively in partnership. The value of neighbourhood policing is really important because you need to problem solve in partnership, work with young people, divert them away from crime to reduce that demand in the first place. The current model that's adopted in policing was understandable in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight was understandable, and you know, there were some significant financial decisions that needed to be made post the bank crash, during austerity. Yes, finances are still tight, but there's some opportunities to make sure with the additional uplift of resources that we've got, that actually we invest them in neighbourhood policing in the front line where people will really see that difference. So that for me is my number one priority moving forward, is to actually achieve what you've described. Shuffling deck chairs around and moving, you know, things around the force with the hope that you'll be able to do it is not going to be sustainable. We need to control and stem the demand in an intelligent way, make sure that we ring-fence neighbourhood resources in those communities where they have the biggest impact, and make sure that we've got all the professional skills and support and those that you know, to investigate the most serious of crimes and deal with, you know, issues such as roads policing and firearms and such like, wrapped around all of that. That for me is where I see success, and I also see some challenges, but also a tremendous amount of opportunities that we can work with that uplift and that additional investment. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Joanne.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Scott. My question for you is, what experience would you bring to the role to demonstrate your ability to work collaboratively with partners to deliver efficiencies? And can you provide an example which demonstrates your ability to strategically plan and collaborate with other forces?
Thank you. I mean, one thing for sure, policing is at its worst when it operates in silo. There's a system strategic leadership element to it, not just public sector, but also commercial sector, commercial organisations and academia, universities, in terms of developing the best ways to protect our communities. One of the things I play a great deal of emphasis is understanding where the pressure points are across other organisations, and understanding, if you had a Venn diagram about this is policing, this is another organisation's priorities, there's always a bit in the middle where effective working together means that we, from a community safety aspect, I suppose, is a good example of doing it, of where we can achieve great things. So within a local context, I'll deal with the first point, within a local context, I've never felt it's so important as leaders of different organisations across the two counties that we come together and work effectively to try and understand each other's demand, but also seek opportunities to try and, problem solve for each other. The wider collaboration bit, I've obviously, got fairly significant experience, as you would expect, with the amount of time I've been in policing and as a chief officer. I've delivered all sorts of programs across the southwest, and when I was in Hampshire, worked really effectively with Thames Valley in making sure that we actually shared some of the resources together and collaborated ICT within joint operations, which is firearms, roads policing, public order, to make sure that we made the most effective and efficient use of the limited resources that we've got. And when you talk about specialist capability, I think that's where the win is. It makes no sense for us to be working in silo, building up, quite heavy costs within individual forces when there's an opportunity to work more effectively, either regionally or nationally. One of the things that we do really effectively in Dorset is develop a public service forum, where actually we come together as a set of system leaders and talk about how we can work more effectively and seek opportunities. And that's been really successful, particularly when we look at some of the issues around violence reduction, particularly because there are different organisations all contributing to making sure that particularly young people stay out of or are deterred from engaging in violence. And if successful, I'm really looking forward to developing that with the violence reduction unit approach that we've got here in Hampshire, which is, for me, one of the most impressive ones I've seen in the country.
You've talked about the impact and influence you've had. What input have you had previously within the wider criminal justice system, and how would you seek to influence improvements across the criminal justice system across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight?
The criminal justice system, the local criminal justice board, the system on the Wessex region is Hampshire, Wiltshire and Dorset. So I was involved heavily in the wider criminal justice system, being head of crime and criminal justice, assistant chief constable before I left. Actually, it's the same group of individuals that I've been working in for the last 2.5 years. So we regularly come together, particularly focusing on areas where, there are issues with, perhaps some of the court backlogs, some of the challenges faced the CPS, issues around charging standards to make sure that the wheels are oiled, that the system's working really effectively. We've got a common interest within the criminal justice system, and that is to see fair justice being done, but also to see it being done swiftly, in a way that is very victim-focused. As a chief constable leading the organisation, there's a whole machinery that sits in and around that work that needs to work on a daily basis really effectively with those organisations. So we come together, we look at the data, we look at opportunities, we look at different ways of doing it. And of course, the Commissioner plays a key role of this in terms of commissioning the right sort of services to improve criminal justice outcomes. So, we need to work through the governance that currently exists and see where there's opportunities that we can, identify how effective commissioning can drive better outcomes for victims of crime. But, as a chief constable leader in an organisation, there's all the very technical aspects of the role in terms of managing finance and making sure that your staff are suitably equipped and trained and in the right places, and that the public can contact us. The list goes on and on. But ultimately, what are we here for? We're here to make people feel safe, and when justice needs to be done, we do it at the very, very best that we can do. So, everything else hangs off that. Those experiences of what I've had over recent years and worked with some great people around it, the connections and the relationships are currently within the region that I currently operate in anyway. So I see that in effect of sort of sliding seats, but understanding what the issues are across the region already.
Okay, David, I think you've got a supplementary.
Yeah, off the back of your very good question, you've already demonstrated your experience on collaborative working through Thames Valley Police, and I'm aware of that. We've had some interesting developments over time, and it's probably a bit of a looking for your vision. We've had ACPO having to come to terms with the introduction of police and crime commissioners, and therefore a change in their culture. Police Scotland have gone from, I can't remember how many, down to Police Scotland 1. So there's that drive in some quarters to have one police force in the country. And so I would just wonder, in the event that you were with us and with us for some time, which is what you're indicating, what your vision is of how policing's going and how you would adapt to that, if that's all right, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Vice Chair. I think it's really important to say there that, I operate in a political environment, but I'm not political. But there is absolutely a role through National Police Chief Council and as a Chief Constable to have a voice in this space around what future policing looks like. Over the years, I've seen various iterations of models and changes and suggestions, from forced mergers to devolved. I understand the mayoral changes that have happened elsewhere. I also think sometimes that's been driven through, for political reasons, but also in some cases financial reasons. My professional view is there is no financial benefit in looking at a significant wider collaborative or forces merging or national police force, but the consultants that will do the detail around that will inform us that process if that ever was followed. I'm a great believer in localism, but being really effective regionally and nationally. Hampshire's, I believe, the 5th or 6th biggest force in the country. It has substantial capabilities and substantial experience of dealing with some very, very tricky issues, some very significant inquiries, and a large, diverse population, which is in the proximity of metropolitan forces. So in terms of my thoughts and thinking, we just need to be really good at what we do. Of course, if there are ever opportunities that we can be more efficient and we can be more effective at looking around collaborating on, with other police forces or other organisations, it would be foolish not to have an open mind around it. But my focus is on local delivery, and I think when we've heard some of the questions today, of course, what the communities of Hampshire and the Isle of Wight want, what the taxpayers want, they want to know that they've got a police force that is really effective, that has a relentless focus on criminals, that has good neighbourhood teams, that they're connected to, they feel safe, they feel getting the right criminal justice outcomes. I wouldn't want the national discussions to be a distraction from that.
Brilliant, thank you very much. If I can go to Jeff now.
Yes. Scott, what do you see as the key priorities and issues for policing in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, and how would you propose to address these?
Thank you for your question. The Commission has a police and crime plan, and ultimately the responsibility of deliver against that plan is for the Chief Constable to lead an organisation to doing so. But even putting that, I don't mean to say, but placing that there and me giving you my professional judgment, I think the force needs to address the point around all of our communities feeling connected to their police, whether that be through the issue that we've discussed before, which is locally connected, engaged police officers that understand their communities, understand the criminals that live in there, and taking, targeted action against them. And that includes, things such as antisocial behaviour, which I know is incredibly important to, and quite rightfully so, for many communities. I think there is a challenge around finance. There is not one public sector organisation that should not be planning for difficult times ahead, and that's why, as a Chief Constable coming in, making sure that the alignment between the finance and the finance plan can deliver what the key operational objectives are. I think 101 is a challenge, the number that people phone to contact the police, and getting effective and up-to-date advice about when a police officer will visit them and what they will investigate. And the last one, I mean, there are many. I could spend a lot of time talking about this. We've got a very young workforce in the force, as we have nationally, due to the recruitment process that's taken place, which I obviously welcome in terms of additional numbers. But we've got a young workforce and a lot of experienced people that are getting to the point of their lives where they're leaving policing. And so making sure that we manage that transition effectively is really important. And I talked about, and brand isn't perhaps the right word, but I talk about my approach. I very much value and need to be reassured that the force has a really strong investigative background, and so that when people need our help, they get the right criminal justice outcome. And doing that with such a young workforce and such a loss of experience will be a challenge, but I'm confident we can achieve it.
Thank you. How can your experience in driving down antisocial behaviour and disrupting county lines in Dorset be applied across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight? When I say antisocial behaviour, we know how vandalism and small crime can absolutely blight our small towns and villages.
Some people would say I have a fairly sort of old-fashioned view about this, and I don't apologise for it. Fabric of our society, whether it be antisocial behaviour, vandalism, the broken windows theory, where small amounts of damage escalate into more severe things, they really concern our communities, and quite rightfully so. There's absolutely a role in policing, and of course working with local authorities and partnership and voluntary groups to make sure that our communities do not accept that type of behaviour is the norm. One of the things that you allude to was the approach that we took in Dorset, which was to absolutely put antisocial behaviour up there, which it is in the police and crime plan, as a priority, and making sure that the police are really robust and tough on that, and there are no, there's a very targeted approach to where we can actually really make a difference. So I do expect neighbourhood teams to be really active and present and tackling those individuals and those groups of people that are doing the sort of things that you're talking about. But also, people shouldn't feel unsafe going out in parts of our community. They should feel safe. And they should feel safe because they see their police taking action. They see their police taking proactive action, and then the police tell them about what they're doing. The clustering effect of antisocial behaviour almost implies as though it's just antisocial behaviour. It's not. It's whether it's people walking down the street smoking drugs. It's whether people are putting spray can graffiti on premises. Whether it's group of individuals that are harassing people. It manifests itself in many different ways. But it requires tough action, and it needs to be within the DNA of the force, and it needs not just to be neighbourhood policing, it needs to be across the whole system.
Brilliant. Got a supplementary from Narinder, then I come to Tony.
Thank you, Chairman. You talked about joining up of priorities with partner organisations. Now we have community safety partnerships, which have engagement with neighbourhood teams, particularly district commanders, etc. Could I have your views on how that engagement will continue and how that message and the joined up priorities will be cascaded throughout the constabulary?
Thank you. I mean, there's several of you in this room that I've worked with in that setting before, within community safety partnerships. I think it's a cornerstone of partnership working. I do think, a common understanding of what the local threats and issues are within your communities and then either pooling resources or the best organisation lead on it is really important. And I obviously haven't done a detailed analysis of the effectiveness of community-based safety partnerships in the last year or two, but I was always very impressed by the work that was done with those individuals. I think there are some threats to that. I think the financial challenges are certainly in relation to some local authorities in terms of the budget deficit that they have to make. It's really important that we keep community safety up there as being a priority, because the value of working together and effectively is for relatively small investment is so significant for our communities. It needs to continue, but we need to always look at opportunities to, you know, where appropriate, to co-locate, to share intelligence, to understand about who the individuals are, which parts of those communities are perhaps causing the most harm, and how can we effectively commission the right services. But where necessary, if the police need to take direct intervention, they should be taking direct intervention. I would expect that every one of the district commanders absolutely is fully engaged, is embedded, understands, along with partners, what are their local issues, what are their priorities, and how they effectively can work within that sort of triangle of community safety environment. I'm a very strong believer in community safety partnerships.
Thank you. Tony.
Thank you. Just antisocial behaviour is one of the things that, as a councillor for a number of years, I've had to deal with, and it actually ruins societies. But the point, should we not be using a different name? Because antisocial behaviour covers a lot of elements. And if I'm sitting here, if I'm honest, it sounds a bit soft this day and age. Oh, it's antisocial behaviour. It's put in a box. Should we not be using, or your view, something a little bit stronger? Because it's like assault. There's different areas of assault, GBH, different things. And I think sometimes we seem to put it in a box and it doesn't become important. I'm not saying it isn't to the police, but even to society. Oh, it's only antisocial behaviour. I'd like to see something a bit stronger personally, that if someone's really causing havoc, it's not antisocial behaviour, it's criminal behaviour and should be dealt with. But I'd like your view on it.
Thanks. I mean, we speak in the same language. Antisocial behaviour is a historic term that was used for, you know, a small number of things that didn't quite fit anywhere else. If you look at the Home Office crime recording categories, there's so many things that fit into antisocial behaviour. Ultimately, it's crime. And I think there probably is a dialogue and a debate to happen, to be had around it. I certainly don't see antisocial behaviour from my perspective as something that is taken lightly. And I think, you know, in the work that we're doing in Dorset, which is absolutely tough enforcement of antisocial behaviour, really, you know, being proactive around the problem, you know, with communities, with business owners, with young people, trying to understand the issues, but no soft touch at all. I think there is a debate and a dialogue to be had around it, and I think you know, antisocial behaviour doesn't actually nail it. It's crime in communities.
Absolutely. Dave M.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, Scott. What is your experience of effectively handling major critical incidents, and how would you support officers to deal with the aftermath of such an event?
Yeah, thanks for the question, David. The obvious, you know, I've got extensive experience around that. I mean, they range, and you know, I can't go into too much detail because it would take too much time. But you know, I was the lead for the Didcot power station disaster, which was a major disaster on a significant scale, which involved the loss of life, but also incredibly complex in terms of managing a huge scene, which you know, was right up there nationally as one of the largest ever disasters at the energy plant up there. I've been the gold commander responding to numerous sort of major incidents, whether they be plane crashes, whether they be dealing with high-profile investigations involving cases with significant public interest. I've been chair of the local resilience forum. I am in Dorset. I was the Gold Commander responding to the COVID pandemic, both in Hampshire and then I was in Dorset. I've dealt with numerous incidents where they've been multi-agency response around them. And you know, can I just clarify the second part of your question, Dave, because I've perhaps just covered the first part.
Yeah, so how would you support officers to deal with the aftermath of such an event?
Yeah, and of course, the sort of pre-planned events, but also responding to events. And equally, one of the things that is absolutely central to that is when you've got, you know, police officers are exposed to trauma every day of their lives, and that can be really impactful over many years. But some of the things that they are exposed to are so significant that they require the right level of trauma-informed management. They call it TRIM processes. They require us to invest in the right wellbeing strategies to make sure that they have the right outreach and support services to deal with any mental impact as well as physical impact around that. And that for me is incredibly important, because your staff are the most important people. They deliver on behalf of the communities, and you really do need to look after them. But I think it's broader than just responding to that major incident, that major, you know, whether you're seeing a terrible road traffic accident, whether you're seeing somebody who's suffered significant violence, or you've been the first on the scene of a murder. There's such a range of events that you need to have it within your DNA, within your toolkit, that staff know where to go. We give them the right access to services. We invest in their well-being throughout their whole service, and actually make sure that you really do consider their needs and the impact upon them, and it's not the drip feed effect. So it's part of policing now for all forces. Is there more that can be done? Absolutely. We need to be looking at the evidence, the opportunities to better support officers in those situations.
Thank you. So lastly for me, how would you approach planning a response to a new or emerging threat to public safety?
If there was a leading time, and I think the pandemic is an example of, and I'll speak from a Hampshire experience around that, of different organisations coming together and doing amazing things despite what, you know, we would have thought would be impossible. And I extend that to the communities as well that came forward. You know, the Local Resilience Forum is the right place in terms of training and exercise and understanding national issues and local things that may happen in our communities. You do need to constantly look at the evidence. You need to look at the best practice. You need to constantly be testing your resilience within different organisations. You can never, the one thing I say often in policing, we're at our most vulnerable point when we're complacent around things. And that's why, you know, breathing life in, from a system leadership point of view, into that multi-agency resilient structure is really important. And as Chief Constable, well, the last, I'm not sure who chairs it in Hampshire now, but it used to be the Chief, and sometimes it can move about. You're absolutely central to that, and making sure that it does remain a focus of all organisations. The other thing, of course, you know, and I mentioned earlier on around Hampshire having a substantial amount of experience in dealing with very complex issues of this nature. I would continue to make sure that the organisation has effective operational planning, resource management, and the right skills within the organisation to respond to anything. And what goes with that, the experience of the leadership team to be able to make sure that's effective.
Thank you very much. Supplementary, Joan?
Yes, thank you, Scott. So Dave's question, you touched on supporting officers. I'd just like to come back to that. And obviously I appreciate that staff are the most important asset that you have, and you need to look after them and retain them. And certainly when they're exposed to high-level trauma. But my question to you is, how do you plan to deal with officers that play the system? Because equally, I think at some points they're given an opportunity to play a system, they've got an exit strategy, and they're looking to take a path that potentially will see them medically retired or discharged. So how do you plan to manage that?
I mean, in the main, police officers and staff, you know, they're incredibly committed public servants, but there are occasions, as you highlight, that some people let themselves down or let their colleagues down and take that path. You know, firstly, you've got to remove the mechanisms and the way that can be done. So in terms of, you know, the processes and procedures, the HR process, the occupational health processes, the investigation at the front end when you feel as though somebody might be going down that path, you need to be really robust. We don't want to end up in employment tribunals or paying people off when they actually need to be staying at work. There are many instances where I've prevented that happening through robust leadership. In some cases, dismissing officers when I feel as though that they are being misleading in relation to some of that information, and taking a really clear approach with all staff. What is key to this is making sure that the supervisors and the managers really understand what that they need to be looking for, what questions that they need to be asking, understanding where your people are. And of course, you know, in employment law, you need to demonstrate you've done as much as possible to prevent those situations occurring. So actually, you know, doing the detail around it is really important. I take a very dim view of that, an incredibly dim view about it. It lets the public down. Cases are few and far between, but they have happened in the past. But setting the right tone, setting the right narrative, the right leadership with all of your team is really, really important right from day one.
Thank you very much. John?
Good. Yes, Scott. As the National Lead for Investigations portfolio, do you support the pledge of the Constabulary to attend all dwelling burglaries, and what benefits will this bring?
John, you just need to turn your...
Yes, and I did do before that decision was taken. I absolutely, burglary is the most intrusive, one of the most intrusive crimes out there, and can impact upon people for the rest of their lives. The waters have got muddied a little bit with crime recording standards about what is a dwelling burglary and what isn't, and that's a fact. You know, there's a temporary structure, this is an outbuilding class, there's that. But when somebody's house gets broken into, their dwelling, where they live, the police officer should not only attend, but they should absolutely make sure that they do the right investigation. It's not usual for people to break into people's houses unless they're a criminal by nature and they have a history of it. And therefore, there are always opportunities to identify those individuals that might be engaged in that crime. But that requires the deployment of an officer, consideration of forensic opportunities, understanding the intelligence picture, perhaps seeing who's out there who may be prolific in that area committing crime. So, no, I took that view and I voiced that view well before the decision was taken with the Chiefs Council.
Thank you very much. If I could now move to Maurice.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. As Chief Constable, you're constantly exposed to scrutiny by the media, by councillors, members of Parliament, and most importantly, members of the public. What is the most challenging situation you've encountered in your career to date, and how would you describe your personal resilience strategy?
It is a very public role, and there are, you know, with the proliferation of social media, with people being able to say what they want about policing, whether it be your police force or as an individual, you have to build a rhino skin around it and take a pragmatic view. If you do what you believe is right, and you're delivering, you know, from a good place with the right intentions, to the very best of your ability, that is really important in terms of managing that situation that you described there. There are numerous occasions that I've been, you know, publicly presented publicly in terms of explaining either policing response or something that's going on. My approach is to focus on policing, focus on the issues of what policing needs to deliver, not necessarily step into the space of wider social commentary. I think there's been too much of a distraction from that, and that's when the public lose confidence around if the policing do do drift into those areas. You know, the case I talked about earlier on, which was the Didcot power station. When you're on Sky News every day for 7 or 8 days explaining to the public what you're doing, and there are challenges coming in and it's got global exposure, you need to be precise, you need to be well informed, you need to be confident about what you're saying, and it just becomes the norm. But, you know, over 30 years of policing, some of that, you know, dealing with high-profile investigations and working with teams dealing with some really complex things, you build that up over years in terms of that resilience, and you grow that rhino skin, and you just focus on what the job is, which is to deliver for communities.
Thank you, Chairman. If I can just ask you to build on that a little bit more, how do you approach both making and delivering difficult decisions?
Not every decision, and neither should it be, and I know it's not what you're suggesting, the Chief Constable does not make decisions on everything. It has to be part of your organisational DNA. You need to empower and develop those individuals to make decisions. There's too much going on. But you always need a rationale, and you need to understand what is the best evidence or the best information out there. So if you're making a big decision, whether it be a change program, whether it be an operational response, you use good people around you to help you with that, whether it be your communications and media advisors, whether it be your detectives that are investigating the serious and complex crime, whether it be your local area commander that understands their local communities. You listen, you take their advice. Some respects you might get some legal advice within your own force. Sometimes you might have to go looking a little bit further. But you use the people around you that are empowered to do so to help you make decisions if they're not decisions that they can take themselves.
Thank you very much. Now moving on to Dave.
So this question links around the College of Policing competency framework, which I've been reminding myself of. A quantitative document, I have to say. But my question really is, how do you, and bear in mind you are currently a Chief Constable in another force anyway, how do you actively demonstrate the competencies and values of the College of Policing's values framework? And how will you inspire others within the force to do the same? So I'm kind of looking at where you are now, and then knowing you're moving, you know, if successful into this force, how will you deal with that? I've noted there's 6 clusters, 3 groups, 4 values, and a whole range of subcategories, but the fundamental principles are there, I think.
As a Chief Constable, I'm not driven by frameworks and values in everything that we do. They underpin it, and a lot of research went into the college, which I support, absolutely. I was obviously one of those people that signed up to them in terms of the way that the organisation should act, but it's a framework. Pragmatism needs to kick in. If you're recruiting, training, leading, developing talent within your organisation, you need to understand how people think and what their approach is. And of course, the majority of those should accord with those frameworks, and they are really important, and I absolutely use them within you know, in terms of developing the organisation. But I also look for a little bit more. I want conversations. I want to get beneath a set of written words and see what makes people tick and think, because ultimately they're leading the organisation, or they're working in the organisation, they're ambassadors for it. Our communities, our public are real people. They want real police officers and real staff, and that's a skill that really needs to shine through over and above the competency framework, which is a useful framework for forces to operate to get that consistency, and there is some evidence base to it. But so of course I do, but I seek more. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Matt.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So just to start to give some background to this, I've recently attended a Police and Crime Panel National Conference and spoke with some of the auditors there, and they were talking about some of the challenges that police forces nationally are facing. One of their concerns was that in trying to deliver these targets, we need more police officers on the beat and on the street, and also those warrant card holders. There was some real concerns about challenges in terms of keeping up numbers of back office staff. I just wondered what you felt was a good ratio of those support staff to officers within a force, and secondly, how you felt it was appropriate to support and acknowledge their contribution to the force, and put that in the public domain.
Thanks. And this is the million-dollar question that's been being discussed for a considerable period. It's not a case of police staff or police officers. You know, the Uplift programme was about visible police officers. Absolutely support that level of investment. PCSOs play an absolutely crucial role. They're uniformed officers, but they're not police officers, so they play a crucial role in relation to neighbourhood policing. And police forces can't be effective unless they have skilled people that don't wear uniforms doing what they do. And you know, developing intelligence, working in control rooms, making sure the infrastructure and enabling services, that is incredibly important. So I play a huge value on all police staff, whether they're uniformed officers or whether they're not uniformed officers. However, the public do articulate, they give their views that they welcome police officers in uniform in their communities, understanding their communities, and would like to see more of it. And the Commissioner's pledge, the Commissioner's plan so far, that for me is something that I absolutely support. So in terms of ratio, it's too much of a binary question really to be able to answer that. There are things like value for money profiles that are done by HMIC. There is some science around about what those ratios are. But, you know, sometimes it makes entire sense to have somebody in a back office role that is a warrant card holder to do something really, really well that will actually save a whole load of time on the front line and manage risk, and not necessarily as simplistic as, you know, are they a frontline response officer? But my starting premise is to deploy as many frontline officers in communities, tackling crime, working with communities. What you've said is one of those things that plays into the finances. It plays into what the current challenges are. You know, and when you look at, you know, investigation of rape and serious sexual assault, they're really, really important. But there are a whole load of people that contribute to that, and some of those are very specialist investigators. Some of those people are not police officers, but they do great work on forensics, and we need those as well. So constantly looking at that ratio, constantly looking at where opportunities lie, but predominantly come from the basis of if we can get as many visible police officers out on the front line, that helps reassure the public.
Dave.
I think this can be my last one for me. This really follows on from your answers to the framework being a framework, and some of the comments you made about, and I sense you're quite people-focused. And so leading into that, my question is, how would you effectively communicate and engage with the staff? I mean, there's over 5,000 officers and staff in the constabulary, as you said earlier. So how will you effectively communicate with those staff and the officers at all levels of the organisation, and involve them in that future direction of the constabulary, which you clearly have in your mind, and are clearly aligned with the Police and Crime Commission on that? But how are you actually going to how are you going to get to the root and branch of the organisation?
Thanks. I mean, yes, as the chief, you're accountable. You set the strategic direction. You work within your chief officer team to do it. A lot of the great and brilliant ideas are those people that are actually doing the job, and they need to feel confident and empowered, and they need to be connected to shaping the organisation. In terms of delivering the message around, you know, the direction of the force, I regularly communicate, you know, through events, through a weekly message that I do, take every opportunity to spend time visiting staff, going out on patrol with them, seeing what it's like for them. But also being really, really positive about the tone within the force and creating an environment within the force that those, you know, first, second, line managers, those middle managers within the organisation feel empowered, beyond trusted, believed, for coming up with ideas about how we can do things differently. And that's, for me, is about streamlining governance as well. So you create the environment in terms of the tone you set, the leadership, and some of the behaviours that you have, and you demonstrate it through action rather than just words. But also, what you do is you create a mechanism where people feel confident to come forward and deliver in the best way that they can. Policing's too complex. There's too many things going in there for everything to be directional. And sometimes, you know, there is a need just to remind people of how effective they are, but they also need to be in an organisation that they not just, you know, want to work in, they feel passionate about, and they feel passionate about what they're doing, and they feel passionate that they can contribute to making a real difference internally and externally. That's always been my approach, and I think as a chief, you're far more exposed if you don't actually verbalise that right from the get-go.
Thank you very much, Dave. Now, a question from me. How would you support the PCC in her ambition to build longer-term resilience in the workforce? And what do you see the key challenges are in doing this?
You know, clearly the Commissioner and I have a shared ambition around policing. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here, and I'm sure she wouldn't have chosen me. But within that, we have discussed this exact point. Policing's taken a bit of a pounding recently publicly for some issues that are within our control and some that are not within our control. And the ones that are in our control, we absolutely need to face up to and deal with. And some of those that are not in our control, we need to make sure that the staff feel valued, supported, that they feel as though that they can reach out within the organisation to get the right level of well-being, the right level of resilience, the right level of their health and their well-being is prioritised. I would certainly be seeking opportunities to how we can make that offer and that opportunity better. I think as people stay in work life longer and people become older, there are some physical issues as well as some mental well-being issues. We've got a younger workforce that will have perhaps some different challenges. And policing has changed over the last 10 years, and we need to recognise, well, what can we do, and what can we enable and empower individuals within policing to take personal responsibility for themselves, and perhaps show them where they might need to go and take those opportunities that are presented to them. So I'm absolutely supportive of anything that makes people in my organisation feel more confident about what they do, feel more passionate to serve the public, feel well, feel happy, feel as though that they're contributing. And we've constantly got to be reviewing that and seeking perhaps more innovative ways than historically we did do, certainly historically from my experience when I policed in the 90s.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And focusing on you for a moment, what would you identify as your areas for professional development, and how would you seek to address these for the benefit of this role?
We're always developing. It doesn't matter what role we've done in life. We're always developing, seeking. We're seeking opportunities. There is something about me. I have I have a strong ambition, and I have a drive to achieve things, and not everybody can necessarily buy into that straight away. Sometimes I might need to be a little bit more patient around it, and that's my recent experience. And I also need to be really, really aware of perhaps what some of the blockers are to people perhaps delivering in the way that I think should do. It's not about me. My experience of going away and being a chief in another force is I've adapted to that role, and I've had time leading another organisation and living through some of those experiences, and that's really useful as a chief, because you cannot be quite so directional in every aspect that you do, and perhaps that's one area that I'll continue to focus on.
Thank you very much. I wonder if I could now move on to Matt.
Thanks again, Chair. Yeah, could you just explain to us your understanding of the term operational independence and what that means to you as a Chief Constable and your working relationship with the PCC?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the question. I said before that I've worked with 5 PCCs in 3 different force areas, and this issue has come up every time, not in a confrontational way, but there is a grey area, and I understand the policing protocol. I have views around it. For us to be effective and serve our communities, I need to have an effective and connected relationship with the Police and Crime Commissioner, because we're in this, ultimately to serve the public. But it cannot be comfortable. There needs to be times when if inadvertently my operational independence is challenged, I can feel confident and comfortable being able to call that out and have discussions. And I'm not saying that would be intentional, but there are many situations and scenarios, perhaps, where that could occur, and I've lived many of those with every one of the Police and Crime Commissioners I've worked with, and similarly, I wouldn't the reverse of that is that I need to, as I said earlier, I need to work within a political environment and be politically aware, but not political in my decision making, and I understand as an elected member that the Police and Crime Commissioner, that is largely her turf around that, and not one for me to get caught up in. But I'm confident enough and strong enough to say that is a decision for the force, and that's an operational decision.
Thank you very much. John?
How do you feel the Commissioner's focus on common sense policing meets with the Force's operational policies? And how would you approach any conflict in this direction?
I mean, I come from a position of common sense and straight talking. Sometimes that's really helpful. There are times that, that isn't as well received. I understand that. So in terms of sort of clarity, common sense approaching, my personal view, I can't comment on behalf of the Commissioner as to why that is her approach. I think that's what the public want. I think they want common sense, they want clarity, but there are times that we need to explain some of our decision making, and we need to make sure, and it goes back to the very first question, that we're engaging with a whole range of communities out there, that perhaps there is an explanation needed, or we need to take some advice in doing it. So it's, as a principle, as a thread, as a way of working, that is my position. Common sense, clear speaking, but always mindful that there are so many different situations in police, and sometimes listening and explanation is really helpful.
Thank you very much. If I can then ask you a couple of other questions to finish on is, how do you demonstrate the principles of the policing protocol whilst undertaking your present role?
Thanks. I alluded to it all earlier. I mean, the policing protocol is not just about independence. There's a whole range of things that's sitting there, and it's recently been under review as a policing protocol, so there is still some ironing out of things. It's not vastly different to the way that it was originally drafted many years ago. Chairman, I come back to my earlier point around, I've seen, well, I didn't say this earlier on, but I'll mention now. I've seen many cases where the relationship between a Police and Crime Commissioner and a Chief Constable hasn't been as productive for the communities as it should be. That would be a situation that, for me, absolutely cannot occur. So there needs to be conversations, there needs to be a close working relationship, but there also needs to be a recognition through the scrutiny and governance that a Police and Crime Commissioner applies, and similarly the point on operational independence, that needs to be followed through, and that's what the policing protocol says.
Thank you very much. I wonder also whether you could just explain to us your understanding of the relationship of accountability between the Commissioner, the Chief Constable and the Police and Crime Panel.
My understanding is that the Police and Crime Panel hold Police and Crime Commissioner to account and scrutinises some of the decision making, the budget, and make sure that the Police and Crime Commissioner is effectively undertaking their duties, or is undertaking their duties in accordance with the mandate that they're given. The Police and Crime Panel is not directly responsible for holding the Chief Constable for account. The Police and Crime Commissioner is responsible for holding the Chief Constable to account on delivery against Police and Crime Plan.
Thank you. And with that in mind and your previous experience, what sort of involvement would you expect to have with the panel?
Well, other than today, I usually support the Police and Crime Commissioner in the budget preset meeting in terms of providing the detail that may assist the Commissioner in presenting the case around what operational benefits there are for agreeing a certain budget or not. I always make myself available to the Police and Crime Commissioner to support him or her in whatever way they feel fit. My experience is different Police and Crime Commissioners have different approaches, but for me, largely, the Police and Crime Panel's relationship is with the Police and Crime Commissioner, not the Chief Constable.
Thank you very much. That's the end of our questions, Scott. I wonder if you'd like to clarify any questions that you've given during the hearing or ask questions of the panel about the next stage of the process.
In relation to the last point, Chairman, I'm satisfied that I've been briefed as to the next stage of the process. Thank you. No, I reiterate where I started off. Being appointed Chief Constable of the Force is, yes, it's a professional honour, but what comes with it is a huge amount of responsibility. Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Constabulary, or now Isle of Wight Constabulary, are a very significant organisation in policing in the UK, and I do not underestimate, by you confirming this appointment, that you will have considered that in your thinking. I do have ideas and experience of working in the force and out of the force, but so do many other people, and there's so many things that we can achieve. Ultimately, that shared ambition around trying to make sure we get proper, connected, visible policing, we investigate crime well, we focus our efforts on making sure that victims feel supported during criminal justice processes, and ultimately, our young people, our communities, our people that are becoming older feel safe in Hampshire has been my mantra for 30 years now. So to be sat here explaining that to you on today is really important, but hopefully shows my commitment to the two counties. And finally, just thank you for your time and your questions today. And hopefully I've been able to answer them to at least a degree of satisfaction. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott. Thank you, Commissioner. The panel will now consider the following recommendations as outlined on pages 21 of our papers. 1, that the panel considers the following recommendation as proposed by the Police and Crime Commissioner, that the Police and Crime Panel confirm the appointment of Mr. Scott Chilton as Chief Constable of Hampshire and Isle of Wight Constabulary. 2, that the delegated authority be given to the Democratic Services Officer in consultation with the Chairman of the panel to submit a report to the Commissioner setting out the outcome of the confirmation hearing in accordance with Schedule 8 of the Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act 2011. So, to do that, I move to recommend that the public be excluded from the meeting during the following item of business, as it is likely, in view of the nature of the business to be transacted or the nature of the proceedings, that if members of the public were present during that item, there would be disclosure to them of exempt information within paragraph 3 of Part 1, Schedule 12A to the Local Government Act 1972. Being informed information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding the information, and further, that in all the circumstances of the case, the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. While there may be public interest in disclosing this information, namely openness in the deliberations of the panel, in determining its recommendation regarding the proposed appointment, it is felt that, on balance, this is outweighed by other factors in favour of maintaining the exemption, namely enabling a full discussion regarding the merits of the proposed appointment. Are members agreed? Thank you very much. As we are agreed, the decision of the panel will be informed to the Commissioner by the end of tomorrow, with the panel's report released publicly no later than 3 clear working days from today. I will now ask anyone attending to leave the room, as this now will end the public session of the meeting. And I will check that the webcast is off. Brilliant, webcast is off.